The anomaly started on a Tuesday, which was not the kind of day Asa Vane associated with anomalies. She had come to the bulletin board in Research Wing C to pin up a calibration notice, routine, 3 lines, the kind of administrative task she performed reflexively while thinking about something else. The shift board was beside the notice board, a physical printout in a laminated sleeve because the digital display in this corridor had been broken for 6 weeks and nobody had submitted the right repair form. Asa glanced at it as she pinned her notice, not because she had any reason to, but because the board was there and she was. Slot 9, Maintenance Tertiary Coolant Loop South Section, Callard. She almost moved on, then she paused. She had seen that name in that slot yesterday. She had been trying to track down a facilities contact to sign off on her xenobehavior survey permit, and she had scanned the board looking for anyone in maintenance who might know who to ask, and slot 9 had said Callard, R. The tertiary coolant loop was a different assignment from yesterday. The slot number was the same. Asa pulled out her data tablet, took a photograph of the board, and went to find the rotation officer. The rotation officer was a Severith named Pak with a desk buried under unlabeled binder clips and a deep personal philosophy that most bureaucratic problems resolve themselves if left alone. He looked at Asa's photograph without appearing to find anything interesting about it. Callard is on the roster, he said. She was in slot 9 yesterday, Asa said. And the day before, the slot number isn't rotating. Pak typed something into his terminal with 2 fingers, as though speed was a philosophical trap. After a long moment he said, "The system has her assignment history as slot 9 for the last 3 rotations. Some technicians prefer consistent slot numbers, familiarity with the paperwork flow. Does she have a stated preference logged?" He typed he waited, "No." "Then why is she in slot 9? The system assigned her." "Can you tell me why?" Another long pause. "It says last valid assignment." Asa wrote that down. Last valid assignment. It felt like the kind of phrase that explained everything and nothing simultaneously. She found Rue Callard 20 minutes later in the south section, lying on her back underneath, a coolant manifold with her toolkit spread on a cloth beside her, and a work order held up against the ceiling while she read it. Rue Callard was 23, human, with the specific quality of presence Asa had catalogued in roughly 1/3 of the human technicians she had observed. A composed, slightly distracted calm, as though 90% of her attention was on whatever was in front of her, and the remaining 10% was keeping the rest of her functional. She had her hair pinned back, a smear of sealant compound on her left wrist, and a look on her face that suggested the work order was telling her something mildly unhelpful. "Excuse me," Asa said. "1 second." Rue read to the end of the work order, made a small sound of disagreement, and slid out from under the manifold. She sat up, looked at Asa. "Sorry, the schematic and the actual pipe layout disagree on 3 fittings. What can I do for you?" Asa introduced herself. She explained about slot 9. She asked if Rue had requested that specific slot assignment. Rue looked at her with the polite blankness of someone who had never considered slot numbers as a category worth considering. "I don't think I've ever requested a slot number," she said. "I usually just take whatever the board shows up with." "Do you know why you keep being assigned to slot 9? "I assumed it was the rotation." Rue paused. "Is it not the rotation? The system says it's your last valid assignment." Rue considered this for a moment. "That doesn't explain anything." "No," Asa agreed, "it doesn't." She filed a query with the outpost's assignment system and spent the next 3 days waiting for it to process. On each of those mornings, slot 9 showed Callard. "Are the assignments changed? Condensate drain, pressure seal inspection, antenna conduit refeed," but the slot and the name were fixed. The query came back flagged. "Assignment origin. Default fill, no primary preference on file. System return to last assigned technician per priority fill protocol. When Asa looked up the priority fill protocol in the administrative handbook, she found a subsection written for a version of the assignment software 2 generations old, describing a fallback behavior that was supposed to have been patched out. The current version had apparently not received that patch. So the system had found Rue Callard, assigned her to slot 9 once, and then kept pulling her name whenever the slot came up unfilled. The newer logic that should have rotated technicians fairly had never kicked in, and nobody had noticed because slot 9 was a low-priority maintenance band, and Rue had been doing the work and not complaining. Asa wrote in her field notes, unexplained recurring assignment anomaly, Callard R slot 9, resolution probable, loop artifact, recommend patch. Then she started paying attention to other things, which was how she began to notice that slot 9 was only the beginning. The second anomaly appeared in her weekly maintenance incident log review. She had requested access to the outpost's incident records for the past 6 weeks and was cross-referencing incident response times with technician availability data to build a baseline for her survey. What she found was that Rue Callard had been the first responder to 7 out of 9 maintenance incidents in the outpost's south and central wings over that period. Not because she was scheduled to be, because she was already there. The Badgen logs showed it clearly. A coolant pressure spike in the central corridor. Rue had badged into the adjacent room 14 minutes before the spike triggered. A communications array fault in Research Wing B. Rue was in the corridor outside for a different job and walked in when she heard the alert. A power fluctuation in the South Laboratory that had knocked out 3 sensitive specimen containers. Rue had been in the maintenance crawlway above and rerouted power from a secondary junction in 4 minutes, 7 minutes before the official incident team arrived. Each entry was individually unremarkable. Any one of them was simply a technician being in the right place. But 7 out of 9, over 6 weeks, at an outpost with 11 maintenance technicians on active rotation, was a distribution that Asa's background in probability made her stare at for a long time. Slot 9 covered the south and central wings, the same sections where all 7 incidents had occurred. The system had kept putting Rue there. She had kept being the one who fixed things. The loop, it turned out, had a secondary effect. It was working. Asa added a line to her field notes. Loop artifact appears to be producing outcomes consistent with optimized assignment. Recommend verifying before patching. She took her notes to the outpost coordinator, a gruff Palian named Dehev who had been running research outposts for 30 years and had developed a professional immunity to surprise. He read through her summary and said, "Coincidence. Small sample." Asa said, 7 out of 9. 9 is a small sample. The South Wing has the highest incident rate on the station. Any technician with consistent South Wing assignments would trend toward those numbers. This was technically true. Asa noted it. She asked Dehev if she should recommend patching the assignment system. Dehev said he would look into it when the quarterly software review came around. That was in 6 weeks. Asa went back to her survey. She kept watching. She did not, she noted privately, submit the patch recommendation. She told herself this was because the investigation was still open. She did not examine that reasoning too closely. The third anomaly happened 16 days later, while Dehev was present, which Asa later suspected was why it finally resolved anything. The outpost's primary power relay experienced a cascading fault at 0914 on a Thursday morning. The fault had been developing for 2 weeks in a subsystem the automated monitors had been flagging as low priority, which meant nobody had looked at it, which meant when it failed completely. Power dropped in 4 corridors simultaneously, including the climate control system for the biological specimen wing. The specimen wing housed the outpost's most sensitive research samples. A temperature deviation of more than 4 degrees for more than 12 minutes would compromise 6 months of work and require a full environmental audit. The backup climate system required a manual relay activation in the maintenance junction at the end of Corridor 7 by a technician with specific systems authorization. There were 3 technicians on the roster with that authorization. 2 were in the East Wing on the far side of the outpost. The third was Rue Callard, who was in Corridor 7. She was there because the assignment board had put her in Slot 9, which covered the South and Central Wings, and Corridor 7 was on the South Wing boundary. She had been rerunning a pressure seal inspection she'd flagged for follow-up. She had her toolkit. She had the authorization. She had, by the time the fault alarm reached the duty office, and the duty officer ran the authorization check, already activated the manual relay. The temperature in the specimen wing dropped 0.8 degrees below baseline before the backup system stabilized it, within authorized margins. No compromise, no audit required. DHEV was in the duty office when the authorization check result came back. He stood very still for a moment. Then he said, "Why was she in Corridor 7? The duty officer checked the board. "Slot 9, sir. Seal inspection follow-up." "Why is she always in Slot 9? The duty officer looked slightly alarmed, as duty officers did when coordinators asked questions that implied the answer should have been obvious months ago. Asa was also in the duty office, where she had taken to spending Thursday mornings reviewing incident log updates. She said, quietly, "Assignment system fallback loop. Priority fill protocol from a legacy software version. I submitted a query note 6 weeks ago recommending verification before patching." DHEV turned to look at her and said nothing for about 4 seconds. Then he said, "Pull the full assignment history. I want to know every time that system put her somewhere she wasn't originally scheduled to be." The full history took 2 days to compile. Asa did it herself, because she had been building toward it for 6 weeks, and she was not going to hand it to someone who would summarize it. The pattern was larger than she had thought. The assignment system had not just been looping Rue into Slot 9. It had been defaulting to her name across 7 distinct maintenance slots on 73 separate days, in every case where a slot came up unfilled, and Rue's last assigned timestamp was the most recent valid entry in that slot's fallback pool. She had been covering, without knowing it, the output of a maintenance department operating at roughly 82% of intended staffing capacity. The outpost's maintenance staffing had been quietly depleted over the past year by transfers, medical holds, and unfilled vacancies that the administrative system had classified as non-urgent. The assignment system had been silently absorbing every gap by routing to the most recently available technician. Since Rue typically finished her shifts 15 to 20 minutes after scheduled end, her name had become the system's default answer to every unfilled slot. She had been doing, without being told, and without any awareness that anything unusual was happening, somewhere between 1.2 and 1.4 technicians' worth of daily maintenance work. The system had been quietly and incorrectly optimizing itself around her, like water finding the path of least resistance, and the path had been a 23-year-old woman who finished her jobs on time and stayed a little late and never argued with the board. Asa compiled all of it into a 70-page technical report with an appendix on the legacy software behavior and a secondary appendix listing every maintenance task Rue Callard had completed that should, by standard rotation, have been completed by someone else. The secondary appendix was 11 pages. She submitted the full report to DHEV on a Friday morning. He read it over the weekend and sent back a single-line acknowledgement, "Understood. Will action Monday." On Monday, the assignment software received the 2 generations overdue patch. The slot system rotated properly for the first time in the outpost's operational history. Rue Callert was assigned to slot 4 and spent 3 days visibly adjusting to a section she hadn't previously been responsible for. She was competent there, too. She expressed no opinion about the change other than to ask, once, if the new assignments would be consistent going forward, because she liked knowing which manual to carry. She received a commendation citation 3 weeks later for her response performance during the Corridor 7 power fault. It noted exceptional availability and technical initiative. She accepted it at the brief outpost ceremony with the expression of someone who was politely pleased and slightly uncertain what they had done, specifically, to merit this particular piece of paperwork. Asa watched her from the back of the room. She filed her final anomaly report the same afternoon. The category field gave her trouble. The outpost's incident taxonomy had categories for equipment fault, procedural gap, human error, scheduling conflict, and environmental deviation. It had no category for a scenario in which a faulty assignment algorithm had, by accident, correctly identified the most capable available technician and routed every crisis to her for 6 weeks without her knowledge. Asa created a new category. She typed it carefully: unexplained beneficial equipment behavior human adjacent. She sat with the completed report for a moment. Then she added a note at the bottom of the last page, in the field marked recommendations. The assignment software patch has been applied. Rotation is now functioning as designed. It is the recommendation of this observer that the new rotation schedule be monitored over the following quarter to determine whether the corrected system produces equivalent maintenance outcomes to the anomalous period. Current hypothesis: it will not. Suggest keeping slot 9 available for flexible assignment pending further review. She submitted it. She never received a formal response. 2 weeks later, she passed the bulletin board in Research Wing C and glanced at the laminated shift sheet out of habit. Slot 9, Maintenance Environmental Systems Supplemental, Callard R. Asa stopped. She pulled out her data tablet. She checked the new rotation software's assignment log, which now had a fully functional audit trail showing the reason for every assignment. Slot 9 showed, assigned via standard rotation. She checked the rotation pool for that slot. There were 4 technicians eligible. Any of them could have been assigned. The software had chosen Rue. Asa stood there for a moment, looking at the board and at the tablet and at the name that had been in slot 9, in one form or another, for the entire duration of her time at this outpost. She put her tablet away. She wrote nothing in her field notes that day. Some categories, she had found, resisted the available columns. The only professional thing to do with them was to close the report and wait to see what happened next. She was still waiting.